welcome to this explainer. Today, we're basically cracking open the ultimate survival rulebook, because it turns out there are these absolutely incredible biological factories working silently inside living things right this very second, just keeping them fueled and functioning. And today, we're going to explore exactly how they pull it off.
So how do we stay alive? I mean, it's a question so incredibly basic, we honestly almost never stop to think about it. But every single living creature on Earth, from a tiny microscopic amoeba floating around in a pond to a massive elephant, and yeah, even you watching this right now, faces this exact same continuous problem. We all need energy, we all need fuel, and to get that fuel, we have to rely on a series of breathtakingly complex, totally invisible processes. Here's our visual roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll look at fundamental life processes. Second, autotrophic nutrition in plants. Third, strategies of heterotrophic organisms. Fourth, food in microscopic organisms. And finally, number 5, the journey of the human digestive system.
Section 1. Fundamental life processes, the basic functions required for survival. When you break down these essential survival jobs, you've got respiration, transportation, and excretion. But to really talk about fuel, we have to zoom in on the very first one on that list, nutrition. It's simply the process of getting and using the ultimate fuel, which is food. Because, well, without nutrition, the rest of the machinery just completely shuts down.
Section 2. Autotrophic nutrition in plants, the self-sustaining producers. It's genuinely amazing to think about the step-by-step chemical factory happening in something as simple as a green leaf. First off, the green pigment, chlorophyll, absorbs light energy straight from the sun. Then comes step 2, which is a process called photolysis. That light energy literally splits water molecules right down the middle into hydrogen and oxygen. And here's a totally mind-bending fact. The life-giving oxygen that we humans breathe, it's actually just a waste byproduct from plants breaking apart those water molecules. Finally, the leftover hydrogen combines with carbon dioxide to create glucose, which is the plant's food. So how do plants actually breathe to get that carbon dioxide? Well, on the surface of leaves, there are these tiny little pores called stomata, and they're surrounded by what are called guard cells. You can basically think of these guard cells like microscopic water balloons. When water flows into them, the balloons swell up, they bend, and that opens the pore to let carbon dioxide inside. But when water flows out, the balloons shrink and deflate, tightly closing the window to stop gas exchange and keep the plant from losing water. I mean, it's just a perfectly engineered pressure valve. But wait, what if you live in a scorching desert, where opening your stomata during the day means losing all your precious water to the blazing sun? Well, desert plants have evolved this phenomenal survival hack. They keep their stomata completely shut during the day to prevent evaporation. They only open those pores at night when it's cool to absorb carbon dioxide, which they temporarily store as an acid. Then, when the sun comes up the next morning, they use the light to finish the photosynthesis process, all while keeping their windows firmly locked down. Pretty brilliant, right?
Section 3. Strategies of heterotrophic organisms, depending on others for fuel.
So, heterotrophs, organisms that rely on others for food, have basically come up with 3 wild survival strategies. First, there's holozoic. This is what humans and animals like tigers do. We take whole food inside our bodies and then break it down. Then you've got the parasitic strategy. Think head lice or the casputa plant, leaching nutrients directly from a living host without immediately killing it. But honestly, the most mind-bending one to me is the saprotrophic strategy. Fungi and bread molds literally release enzymes to digest their food outside of their bodies. They turn it into this liquid soup, and only then do they absorb it. No way, right?
Section 4. Food in microscopic organisms. How single cells hunt.
Let's zoom way, way down to the microscopic level and look at how single cells hunt. Take the amoeba. It acts like a little shapeshifter. It extends these fluid, false feet called pseudopodia to physically reach out, surround, and completely engulf its prey, making a temporary, custom-built stomach called a food vacuole. But then you have the paramecium, which takes a much more, organized approach. Its rigid, shoe-shaped body is covered in tiny, constantly beating hairs called cilia. These hairs rapidly sweep passing food particles right into a fixed, designated opening called an oral groove. So you've got 2 vastly different solutions to the exact same microscopic problem. Section 5. Journey of the human digestive system, the ultimate chemical processing plant. Okay, now it's time to turn the lens on ourselves.
If we look at the big picture timeline of the human digestive pipeline, it starts fast. Within about 10 seconds of swallowing, food gets pushed down the esophagus by these wave-like muscle contractions called peristaltic movement. It then drops into the stomach, which acts as this churning acid bath for around 4 hours. From there, it spends roughly 8 hours winding its way through the small intestine for final digestion and absorption. Finally, it spends up to 16 hours in the large intestine, where water is wrung out of whatever's left before it exits. It's wild when you actually stop and look at the intense chemistry happening all along that pipeline. It starts right in your mouth, where salivary amylase immediately begins breaking down starches. But consider the stomach. Your stomach produces actual deadly hydrochloric acid. Why? To activate a protein-breaking enzyme called pepsin. And to keep that acid from literally digesting your own internal organs, the stomach brilliantly coats its inner walls with a thick layer of protective mucus. Further down the line, the liver acts like a detergent factory, releasing bile juice to shatter large globs of fat, while the pancreas drops in its own heavy-duty enzymes to finish up the job. Now, here's a super interesting real-world application of this chemistry. Your liver produces that fat-busting bile we just talked about, but it actually stores it in a tiny little sac called the gallbladder. If someone has to have their gallbladder surgically removed, say because of gallstones, their liver will still make bile, but instead of being stored, it just constantly drips into the intestine. It can't be released in large bursts anymore. And that is exactly why doctors tell patients without a gallbladder to avoid heavy, greasy meals. They simply don't have the stored bile reserves to quickly emulsify all that sudden fat. But here's the thing. Breaking all that food down is completely pointless if your body can't actually capture it, right? Enter the villi. Imagine the inside of your small intestine lined with literally millions of microscopic waving finger-like projections. What they do is dramatically increase the surface area inside your gut, making sure there is maximum contact with the digested food. And inside each of those tiny little fingers is a rich network of blood vessels, just waiting to absorb those sugars, amino acids, and fats, and then rapidly transport them out to every single one of your billions of cells. Okay, I've got a totally counterintuitive fact for you about animal anatomy. Who do you think has a longer small intestine? A massive ferocious tiger or a little grazing goat? Surprisingly, it's the goat. Herbivores have significantly longer digestive tracts because plant matter is packed full of this rigid stuff called cellulose, which is incredibly difficult and time-consuming to break down. Carnivores, on the other hand, despite their massive size, process meat much faster, which means they require a much shorter pipeline. Finally, as we reach the literal end of the line, there's a fascinating little distinction we need to clear up. Getting rid of unabsorbed solid waste from the digestive tract is actually called egestion, not excretion. Excretion is a completely different process. It's how your kidneys and your skin filter metabolic waste out of your blood, producing things like sweat or urine. Egestion is basically just taking the trash out of the digestive pipeline. So from microscopic amoebas trapping food to the immense chemical factories running inside us, these core rules of survival are relentlessly operating inside of you at this very second. It really makes you wonder, what other incredible, completely invisible machinery is running your body right now while you aren't even looking? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.
Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.